So many people, of course, are looking ahead to the midterm elections, but there are going to be so many political landmines for this administration to have to deal with even before we get to November. And perhaps I think the biggest is going to be what will take place with those negotiations over Kuzma, because we know already the president has signaled that he could and perhaps likely will walk away from this massive trade deal. And that's going to have enormous economic implications, not only for the United States, but for Canada as well. And certainly, given the cooling economy right now, the jobs outlook in terms of rising inflation and unemployment, those and what the president does on that trade agreement will certainly have a tremendous impact on all of that. And what the president does will have tremendous meaning for the global outlook as well.
The conversation surrounding this deal, Eric, has become so important here in Canada, of course, but do we have any signals on what it is that could potentially make Trump walk away from this?
Well, it's his own words and what we've heard specifically and directly from his U.S. trade representative back in November when public meetings began in earnest here in the United States. And of course, the administration was hearing from a number of key individuals and organizations as it relates to Kuzma. What we kept hearing over and over, even as industry and academics and others were singing the praises of this regional free trade agreement, it was the administration itself that continued to say that they believe Canada was giving the United States a raw deal, and the president could very well walk away. Now, all of this could be about negotiating tactics.
Since the point at which Trump's influence began to have a visible impact on how global decisions are made, many observers have quickly recognized familiar warning signs. His administration has long demonstrated a willingness to weaken or set aside decades-old frameworks of cooperation across trade, security, and multilateral institutions whenever they fail to deliver immediate benefits to the United States as he defines them. Canada has experienced this directly, as trade agreements were publicly threatened and economic stability treated as a bargaining chip. What makes the current discussions far more serious, however, is that the scope of the issue has moved well beyond the economic realm. Recent actions suggest that Trump is increasingly inclined to assert U.S. military power on a global scale, and when Washington adopts such a hardline posture, the risks do not remain confined to specific flashpoints where forces are deployed. Strategic rivals and destabilizing actors rarely view tensions in isolation. In their calculations, the closest allies and countries located geographically near the United States are often seen as part of a broader, unified target landscape. For this reason, a growing number of leading security experts in Canada are warning that the country is becoming more vulnerable simply because of its geography, its partnerships, and its deep integration with the United States operating under Trump's assertive worldview. Canada does not need to provoke conflict or make any missteps to find itself at risk. It exists within a geopolitical space shaped by decisions beyond its control. That reality is forcing Canada's leadership to reassess how they evaluate the surrounding security environment. In this context, ignoring emerging risks can no longer be regarded as prudence or calm restraint. It increasingly resembles a form of negligence that is difficult to justify.
We know Donald Trump is very good at trying to set the stage for that. But nevertheless, given how the president has talked about Canada and more importantly, how he's acted, again, this is very much, I think, a very real concern.
All right, so from negotiating tactics now to military action, Eric, and when we look at what's happened recently, the tankers in Venezuela, the presence in Greenland, I mean, these are big military moves. What could they signal for next year?
Yeah, and I think this is something that Canada also should be deeply worried about. Just recently, we have seen missile strikes in Nigeria. The president has named an envoy to actually negotiate Greenland becoming part of the United States. And when Donald Trump came into office, he made clear that he would be willing to use what he called economic force to actually take Canada as well. And so when you look at the military aggression in Venezuela, Canada has an enormous amount of vast natural resources. And that is what the play is for Donald Trump and his ambitions to bring Canada under U.S. sovereignty has not waned at all this year. In fact, when you look at the moves that we're seeing in places like Greenland, Venezuela, Nigeria, I think that only puts a big bigger target on Canada.
All of these developments carry an even more troubling political dimension, one that Canada can no longer afford to dismiss with humor or its familiar reflex of skepticism. The way Trump has spoken about Canada for some time no longer reflects the spirit of equal partnership and mutual respect that has historically defined relations between the two countries. Instead, the tone has often been coercive, dismissive, and at times laced with insinuations of control. References to annexation, remarks about taking Canada, or casual comments treating Canada as an entity within Washington's sphere of manipulation have surfaced repeatedly. For years, such language was often brushed aside as exaggeration or political theater. In the past, it was easy to believe these remarks were merely performative. Today, however, security experts are urging Canadians to take them more seriously, not because Trump is expected to pursue the annexation of Canada in the near term, but because language reflects mindset. Trump views power in the world as a game of extraction. Weaken a partner, and they become easier to use. Undermine sovereignty, and you gain leverage. Create dependence, and influence follows naturally. When a leader with this way of thinking helps shape the international order, Canada is no longer simply a friendly neighbor. It can be perceived as a strategic asset, particularly at a time when other states appear to be weakening. This is not an unfounded suspicion. That assessment is grounded directly in Trump's past behavior and the beliefs he has openly expressed. It explains why, today, Canadian sovereignty is being discussed as a matter of survival rather than as a theoretical political concern. For the first time in decades, Canadians are being reminded in blunt terms that respect should never be assumed as a given.
And I think how the president deals with Kuzma also is going to play massively in his belief and his thinking and his ambitions that Canada should be part of the United States.
Which is notable, Eric, that that's still very much on the radar, because in Canada, of course, the reaction to the entire 51st state suggestion conversation has been everything from, laughing it off as a joke to that very serious message of Canada is not for sale. But this is still very much in Trump's sights?
Absolutely, it is. And it hasn't gone away, which is surprising, because oftentimes when Donald Trump says things like this, wanting Greenland, oftentimes we see it as bluster, that this is the president being just a master showman. But when you look at actions, Canada is still the only G7 nation that does not have a free trade agreement with the United States, save for Kuzma.
And in my view, the way the president handles the Kuzma issue will have a profound impact on his level of trust, his thinking, and even his ambitions regarding whether Canada should be regarded as part of the United States. What is striking, Eric, is that this topic continues to attract significant attention, because in Canada, the reaction to the entire debate about the idea of becoming the 51st state varies widely. From treating it as a political joke to firm declarations that Canada is not something to be bought or sold. Even so, the issue clearly remains on Trump's radar. That is exactly right. And what is notable is that this discussion has not faded away, which is rather unusual. Typically, when Donald Trump makes remarks such as expressing a desire to acquire Greenland, they are often dismissed as bluster, more an expression of personality than a serious policy direction. Yet when one looks at concrete realities, Canada remains the only G7 country without a comprehensive free trade agreement with the United States, aside from the Kuzma framework. That is the geopolitical context in which is governing the country, and it helps explain the direction of his policies. For decades, Canada placed genuine trust, often with pride, in diplomacy, cooperation, and moral credibility as the foundations of national security. Those values remain deeply important, but a world increasingly shaped by pressure and hard military power is demanding more tangible guarantees. Carney appears keenly aware of this reality. Rather than relying solely on goodwill and alliance networks, he has begun pushing Canada toward a substantive modernization of its defense posture, something the country has not undertaken in a meaningful way for many decades. This does not imply abandoning Canada's identity. The focus here is on protecting that very identity. A sovereign country cannot rely entirely on the restraint or goodwill of external leaders to ensure its security. It must possess the ability to defend itself when circumstances require it. In that sense, Carney's defense agenda is not merely about military expansion, it is a signal of strategic maturity. It reflects Canada finally distinguishing between peace as a value and peace as a guarantee. The value of peace remains intact, but guarantees require real capabilities. This is also why Arctic security has suddenly become a top priority. the region is rapidly emerging as a focal point of strategic competition. Climate change is opening up greater access to the Arctic. Russia and other powers see clear strategic opportunities there. If Canada cannot credibly protect its Arctic territory, others will make decisions about the future of that region on our behalf. Carney understands this clearly.
The president continues to see tariffs as a really good thing, even though they're debilitating both for the U.S. and Canadian economy. And more importantly, we're talking about more than a century of friendship, alliance, and partnership. And Donald Trump has already attempted in every way imaginable to blow that up. And the reason, of course, is the president believes that he can weaken Canada and in doing so, make it that much easier for the United States to overtake the nation.
Well, before we let you go, Eric, on that note, how are tariffs going for President Trump around the rest of the world? Because we knew that at one time this was very much not just a Canada conversation.
That's right. The president, it's been basically the U.S. versus the world, as the United States has placed massive tariffs on all nations across the globe.
All of this leads us to one of the clearest illustrations of the shift in Canada's strategic thinking: the debate surrounding the development of amphibious landing capabilities. For many years, Canada has operated without this core capability, even as major powers such as the United States, Australia, and China have long treated it as a given. What does this actually mean in practical terms? It means that Canada, despite possessing an extensive coastline, remote northern communities, and highly complex terrain, has lacked the ability to deploy forces rapidly, move equipment efficiently, or respond decisively to emergencies on its own territory or in support of allies. The introduction of an amphibious platform would fundamentally change that reality. It would provide mobility, speed, flexibility, and a tangible presence. It would allow Canada to protect its coastlines, strengthen Arctic security, assert sovereignty in remote regions, respond to humanitarian disasters at home and abroad, and make a credible contribution to global stability efforts. It is important to stress that this is not simply about preparing for war. At its core, this is about eliminating long-standing vulnerabilities. As capability increases, susceptibility to challenge diminishes. In international politics, fragility often serves as an invitation to external pressure. Capability itself is an effective deterrent. Possessing such platforms sends a clear signal that Canada no longer accepts a passive posture. The country is prepared to build a defense posture befitting a sovereign state that takes its own security seriously. This approach aligns fully with the broader philosophy of Mark Carney, a Canada that does not wait to be forced into crisis, but quietly prepares to ensure that such a situation never arises.
The Royal Canadian Navy is looking ahead to the future of its fleet. One of the concepts being considered is a Canadian-built ice-capable landing ship to defend the Arctic. As CBC's Muir Brewster tells us, it is just one of the projects being imagined by military planners as the federal government pours over $81 billion into defense over the next few years.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has made defending the Arctic a defense priority. The question vexing planners is how to operate over such vast distances, especially in an emergency. The commander of the Canadian Navy has an idea: an amphibious ship, one that does not require a port.
As we went through that analysis, we examined what would happen if we had a small community in distress in the high Arctic in February. How could we get capability there? We could certainly improvise an awful lot through the Air Force, through the Coast Guard, doing other things. But to sustain an operation up in the north, we sort of realized that some form of Arctic mobile base probably made a lot of sense. And that is effectively what an amphibious ship is.
This is sort of what he's talking about. The USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship capable of carrying troops and vehicles and supplies over vast distances. A ship able to deposit those troops and equipment on any beach. Most of the world's navies, including more recently Australia and China,